Imagine working 40 hours a week, getting off your shift completely exhausted, and realizing that your only option for sleep tonight is to set an alarm for 5:30 a.m.
Yeah, right before the sun even comes up.
Exactly. Why? So you can wake up in the freezing dark to move your car before the police confiscate it,
Yeah.
taking away, the very last shelter you have in the world.
It's just brutal.
It really is. And that isn't some hypothetical dystopian scenario, right?
Yeah.
That is the lived reality
Right.
for thousands of people in California tonight.
Right.
Because homelessness isn't just this single monolithic American experience. It varies wildly by state, completely shaped by local laws, geography, and economics.
I mean, we look at national statistics and think we get the crisis, but survival is entirely dependent on your zip code.
So true.
Yeah.
So today, we are building a real-time scorecard for the state of California to evaluate what it's actually like to survive without housing here.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, right in front, we're building this score as we go.
Right, so it's going to change.
Exactly. It will evolve dynamically throughout this deep dive based on the evidence, so you won't see the final result until the very end.
Well, to really understand what it means to survive in California right now, we have to establish a baseline of the sheer scale we are dealing with.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
If we look at the 2025 point-in-time count data, and for anyone unfamiliar, the point-in-time count is essentially this nationwide census of the unhoused taken on a single night in January.
Right.
So California currently has 181,934 unhoused people.
Wow. But wait, isn't that actually a slight drop from the year before?
It is, yeah. That represents a 2.8% decrease from 2024. But, context is absolutely everything here.
Right, because that's still a massive number.
Exactly. Even with that slight dip, California still accounts for roughly 28% of the entire nation's unhoused population. And a staggering 66% of those individuals are living unsheltered.
Meaning they aren't in a facility at all.
Right. They are in cars, in tents, or literally just on the concrete.
But we are seeing some shifts in who actually makes up that population, right?
Yeah.
Because the demographics seem to be changing depending on, where you look.
They are, yeah. State interventions are actually moving the needle for specific groups. Like veteran and youth homelessness are dropping noticeably.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. The state saw a reduction of over 1,200 veterans and 1,100 unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness over the last year.
Okay, what about geographically?
Well, Southern and Northern California both saw overall decreases, but Central California is feeling a real squeeze right now.
How so?
They are experiencing this massive spike in their sheltered populations because affordable housing supplies in those more rural agricultural communities are just drying up entirely.
I mean, I have to pause you there because I always struggle with these macro level statistics.
Yeah.
A 2.8% decrease looks like a victory on a spreadsheet in Sacramento, right? But if you are actually living on the street in California right now, does a 2.8% decrease change your daily reality at all?
Not even a little bit.
Right. Like if you're sleeping on a sidewalk in San Francisco or trying to keep your kids warm in a sedan in Los Angeles, you don't feel a statistical dip.
You don't feel it at all. The day-to-day survival of an unhoused person is completely disconnected from a 2.8% shift in a federal census.
It's just numbers to them.
Exactly.
Right.
Daily survival is dictated by local police enforcement, the actual cost of a local apartment, and just navigating this labyrinth of bureaucratic systems.
Which brings us perfectly to the actual foundation of the crisis. If the 2.8% dip doesn't matter on the pavement, what does?
Right.
Let's start at the absolute baseline. Trying to pay for a roof. If we look at the 2024 Annual Homeless Assessment Report to Congress, the root cause in California is glaringly obvious.
The affordability.
Exactly. So we're talking about a massive ongoing crisis caused by a sheer lack of affordable housing.
Well,
California's cost of living is roughly 50% higher than the national average.
And what's crucial to understand here is how this mathematical reality challenges the dominant public narrative.
What do you mean?
Well, there is this deeply ingrained assumption in American culture that losing your housing is primarily driven by a mental health crisis or severe, debilitating addiction.
Right, that's the stereotype.
Yeah, and while those are absolutely compounding factors for some individuals, for a massive, growing portion of the population, homelessness is just the result of the sheer mathematical impossibility of paying rent.
The numbers just don't work.
Exactly. When the median rent for an available apartment climbs past $2,000 and a full-time minimum wage job simply cannot cover a basic two-bedroom anywhere in the state housing, stops being a basic utility.
It becomes a luxury good.
Yes.
It's a structural brick wall barrier before you even take your first step.
Right.
Because the cost of entry to housing is so impossibly high, this lowers the overall picture from the start.
Yeah.
Based on this, the current draft score is taking a major hit.
So if the math of rent is impossible, the immediate logical question becomes, what is the state doing to physically put a roof over these people tonight?
Right. Which brings us to our second category, emergency shelter access.
Exactly. If you cannot mathematically afford an apartment, where do you go? Well, the data shows California had a 5.1% increase in its sheltered population in 2025.
Wow.
Bringing that number up to 66,351 people.
Getting more people indoors is objectively a good thing.
It is?
But knowing the total population is over 180,000, that 5.1% increase kind of feels like celebrating a bucket of water being thrown onto a forest fire.
That's a fair point. The expansion of interim housing, rapid rehousing resources, and emergency shelters is absorbing a portion of the population that was previously exposed to the elements.
Right. These are real beds keeping real people out of the rain.
Yes, absolutely. However, the tension here is the huge gap between that rising shelter capacity and the overwhelming volume of need.
There just aren't enough beds.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Even with those new beds coming online, there are still over 115,000 people living completely unsheltered in the state on any given night.
Wow. Still, adding beds is a positive step, so this raises the overall picture slightly. Based on this, the current draft score is stabilizing, but remains low. Yeah. But that leaves us with a terrifying question. What happens to the 115,000 people who are locked out of that impossible housing market and can't get one of those limited shelter beds?
They are outside.
How does the state treat them when they're outside? This brings us to category 3, criminalization and enforcement.
And that is where the lived reality becomes incredibly punitive. Let's just look at how local governments enforce survival.
Okay.
In Los Angeles, you have Municipal Code 85.02. This law essentially bans sleeping in vehicles in residential areas between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m.
So right when you actually need to sleep.
Exactly. Or look at Oakland. They recently passed a new encampment abatement policy, and the critical mechanism here is that they specifically redefine the legal word encampments to exclude vehicles.
Wait, if they take vehicles out of the legal definition of an encampment, they're essentially stripping away the civil rights protections and advance warnings required to clear a human camp, right?
That is the exact legal loophole they created.
They're just treating someone's actual home like an abandoned Honda left in a loading zone.
Yep. By removing that definition, the city can bypass standard civil notice protocols. It allows them to utilize standard vehicle codes to tow RVs and cars immediately.
Without any warning.
Without the advance warning that was previously required when someone's shelter was classified as a camp.
So if you lose your apartment because rent goes up, and you do the responsible thing by moving your life into your car so you aren't sleeping on the sidewalk, the city basically turns your only remaining shelter into a ticking financial time bomb.
That is exactly what happens.
It's like a game of monetary musical chairs. But when the music stops, instead of just losing a seat, the city confiscates your house and charges you a fortune to get it back.
That is the reality of the trap. Under laws like LA's 85.02, police aren't just looking for parking violations, they're actively looking for signs of human habitation.
I'll go ahead.
Condensation on the windows, a sleeping bag in the back seat, cooking gear. A citation starts at $25, but it quickly compounds to $75 for subsequent violations.
And if you can't pay that?
If your vehicle gets towed, the impound fees are devastating. Consider the case of Bob Kaufman, an older man documented in our sources.
What happened here?
He spent $4,000 on impound and towing fees just to get his older RV back from the city.
$4,000. I mean, if he had $4,000 in disposable income, he wouldn't be living in a broken-down RV in the first place.
Right.
That completely wipes out whatever savings someone might be scraping together for a security deposit.
Now, it is worth noting there has been some major legal pushback. The California Court of Appeal recently struck down what are known as poverty tows.
Ooh, what are those?
This means a municipality cannot tow a legally parked car without a warrant simply as a tool to collect unpaid parking tickets.
Okay, that sounds like a major victory for advocates.
It was, but the problem is local governments just adapt. If they can't use unpaid tickets, they find other municipal codes to enforce sweeps.
Like what Oakland did.
Exactly, like Oakland redefining encampments. Or cities abruptly enforcing strict 2-hour parking limits for oversized vehicles in areas where they know RV dwellers park.
The heavy penalization of survival shifts the score downward. This lowers the overall picture significantly.
When you criminalize the very last safety net someone has their car, you are pushing them directly onto the concrete. You are accelerating the downward spiral.
Okay, we are about a third of the way through our analysis, which means it is time to look at where we stand. If you are watching this, you will see our preliminary score overlay popping up right now, labeled Graph Score.
There it is.
And if you are listening on audio, picture a massive flashing grade that is barely hanging on. I want to emphasize to you that this is our draft score. This is not the final score.
Right. Things could change.
The upcoming data, especially regarding how the state handles this massive vehicular homelessness crisis and the actual pathways out of the shelter system, are going to significantly change this final result.
We really do need to dig deeper into the vehicle aspect for Category 4 because it represents a complete paradigm shift in how we need to understand modern homelessness.
We absolutely do, because if you're being towed and fined constantly, how friendly can this environment actually be? Up to 60% of the unhoused population in Los Angeles and 35% in San Francisco live in their vehicles.
Yeah, that isn't a fringe group. That is the core of the crisis.
It really is.
It is the fastest growing segment of the unhoused population, and the primary state-level intervention for this has been safe parking programs, or SPPs.
Right.
These programs actually originated back in 2004 in Santa Barbara.
Hmm.
The core mechanism is to provide managed off-street parking lots where people can park legally overnight.
So they can sleep without worrying.
Yes, and use a sanitary restroom and theoretically connect with social services without the constant terror of a midnight police knock.
Which sounds like a practical, immediate solution. But the mechanics of how these lots actually operate is where things fall apart, right?
Completely. Because most of these programs are funded only for overnight operation. And that creates a devastating daily cycle known as the dawn eviction.
Explain how a dawn eviction works.
Because the safe parking lots often close strictly at 6:00 a.m., exhausted individuals and families are forced to wake up before sunrise. They have to pack up their entire lives.
And go where?
They drive back out onto the very streets where their vehicles are criminalized during the day.
That's terrible.
They spend their extremely limited money burning gas just moving the vehicle back and forth to avoid daytime citations. But the bureaucracy gets even more suffocating when we look at permitting programs.
Like San Francisco's large vehicle refuge permit.
Exactly.
Let's talk about this permit because the mechanism behind it is just infuriating. San Francisco introduced this permit to supposedly protect RV dwellers from a new citywide 2-hour parking limit.
Right.
The rule was, if you could prove you lived in the city before a certain date, you got an exemption permit. But there is a massive, tragic loophole built into the fine print.
The permits require the vehicle registration to be strictly in the applicant's name, which, to a bureaucrat, sounds pretty standard.
Sure.
But it shows a complete misunderstanding of the reality of vehicle dwelling. Many people live in older RVs they don't legally own on paper.
Like the story of Miguel Mercado.
Yes. A 58-year-old Nicaraguan immigrant. He lived in his friend's RV for almost 3 years. He helped repair the engine. He moved it every week for street sweeping. He maintained it.
It was his home.
It was. But because of the informal networks of survival, his name wasn't on the DMV registration.
So what happened?
Well, when the city rolled out the permit program, Miguel's friend, who was the legally registered owner, qualified for a housing buyback program and was moved into a studio apartment.
Okay.
But because Miguel wasn't on the title, outreach workers claimed they had no legal mechanism to help him or grant him a permit.
Okay.
The RV was towed and completely destroyed by the city, and Miguel was put right back onto the pavement. He ended up having to sleep in a broken-down car he borrowed from someone else. Because the system often punishes the very coping mechanisms people use to survive, this shifts the score further into the red. It's punishing people for the informal community networks they build just to stay alive.
It really is.
Which leads us to the next metric, Category 5, outreach and social services. Who is actually on the ground helping?
We have to acknowledge the genuine bright spots here. As we mentioned at the top, Targeted state funding has successfully scaled evidence-based Housing First programs.
Specifically for veterans and youth, right?
Yes, and Housing First isn't just a catchy name. It's a specific, proven methodology. It means you give someone a permanent place to live without making them jump through impossible hoops first.
Right.
There are no required sobriety tests, no mandatory job training programs they have to pass before they get the keys. You stabilize them with a roof first and then provide the wraparound services.
And that works.
When California applies dedicated funding to that exact model, it works.
But the broader system outside of those specific veteran and youth programs feels like a nightmare of miscommunication. It is deep, agonizing bureaucratic failure on the ground. Take the story of Katia.
The pregnant mother living in an RV.
Yes. An outreach worker approached her and placed her and her husband into a 90-day temporary hotel room, promising them it was the first stepping stone to permanent housing.
Okay.
They were told that transitioning out of the RV would help them qualify for the permanent spot faster. But the exact same day they moved into the hotel, the city towed their RV away.
And they couldn't get it back. They lost their personal belongings, everything they owned, while they were sitting in a city-provided hotel.
Yes. And a few days later, she gave birth via emergency C-section.
Wow.
But instead of transitioning to permanent housing like they were promised, her family was just shuffled to another temporary 90-day shelter.
Did she ever get a permanent spot?
When she finally got an audience to ask about a permanent home, she was bluntly told it was very unlikely because those coveted spots are strictly reserved for the most severely disabled or chronically ill.
And what makes Katia's story even worse is that she found out later her family had been caught up in a local scam.
Yeah, that part is just unbelievable.
There was a fired San Francisco outreach worker who was literally scamming vulnerable people on the street, selling fake RV parking permits for cash.
Right.
Katia was told she no longer qualified for certain legitimate programs because of this illegal sticker that the scammer had sold her.
It's awful.
When a pregnant mother's home is towed the same day she's put in a temporary hotel and she's punished for being scammed by the people meant to help her, that's not just a mistake, that's bureaucratic displacement.
It highlights a system where individuals are entirely at the mercy of chaotic, uncoordinated agencies.
The inconsistency of care and bureaucratic displacement shifts the score. Based on this, the current draft score is fluctuating heavily. We have pockets of absolute excellence and life-saving intervention right next to bureaucratic nightmares that actively harm the people they're supposed to serve.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most important metric, pathways to permanent housing.
All right, this is the category 6.
This is the ultimate bottleneck. All of these interventions we've discussed, the emergency shelters, the safe parking lots, the 90-day hotel vouchers, they are all explicitly designed to be temporary stops on the way to permanent housing.
But what happens when the back door is locked?
The numbers here are just chillin'. Look at San Francisco. Between July 2024 and May 2025, out of 1,826 families assessed for rental support, only 30 were actually placed into housing.
30 out of almost 2,000.
Yeah. That is a success rate of less than 1.6%.
Let me make sure I understand the mechanism behind that failure. Why is it only 1.6%? Are there just literally no apartments available, or is the system broken?
It's a toxic combination of factors. First, you have extreme NIMBism.
Local residents blocking things.
Yeah, actively blocking high-density affordable housing developments in their neighborhoods through endless environmental review lawsuits. Then you have restrictive local zoning laws that make it illegal to build apartment buildings in massive swaths of the state.
And the vouchers.
That's the third part. You have a massive shortage of landlords who are willing to accept Section 8 or housing vouchers, despite laws prohibiting discrimination against voucher holders. The apartments might physically exist, but the doors are closed.
And that creates a backlog that destroys the temporary system.
Exactly. Researchers at UC San Diego evaluated these safe parking programs and identified what they call the stuckness effect.
The stuckness effect.
Yes. They found that the probability of a positive exit into permanent housing decays by 2% for every single week a person spends living in a safe parking lot.
So the longer you are forced to wait in the temporary system, the less likely you are to ever escape it. It just grinds you down.
Temporary interventions without back-end permanent housing simply turn into permanent waiting rooms. Now, there are new legislative hopes trying to fix this.
Like Senate Bill 692.
Right. SB 692 is attempting to authorize local jurisdictions to use state funding to operate vehicle buyback programs. But crucially, the law requires that the buyback offer must be directly paired with an immediate offer of permanent or interim housing.
which addresses the exact loophole that left Miguel Mercado sleeping on the pavement when his friend's RV was destroyed.
It does. But these legislative efforts are in their absolute infancy. They haven't scaled yet. The current daily reality is a massive, impenetrable bottleneck.
Because exiting the system is statistically improbable for most, this lowers the overall picture for our final calculation. We've gone through the data, the policies, and the lived experiences. So let's pull it all together and finalize this real-time scorecard.
Let's do it.
We set out to evaluate what it's actually like to survive without housing in California.
Yeah.
We've seen major strengths, right? The state is successfully dropping veteran and youth homelessness through targeted, no-strings-attached housing-first intervention.
Yes.
They're actively increasing shelter capacity to get people out of the rain.
Yeah.
And they pioneered the safe parking program model that the rest of the country is trying to copy.
But those targeted strengths are fighting against massive systemic weaknesses. You have an extreme cost of living that makes basic housing mathematically impossible for a huge percentage of the workforce. Right.
You have severe punitive criminalization of vehicle dwellers through complex municipal codes and aggressive towing practices. And above all, you have a massive bottleneck in actually transitioning people from temporary relief into permanent housing.
So let's assign the final grades. How are we scoring housing affordability?
That has to be an F. The baseline cost of living and the gap between wages and rent creates an insurmountable barrier to entry.
Shelter access.
I'd give that a C. The capacity is growing, which is commendable, but it is still vastly outpaced by the sheer volume of need on the streets.
Criminalization and enforcement.
A D-. The punitive measures, the dawn evictions, and the compounding fines literally trap people in endless cycles of debt, turning poverty into a punishable offense.
What about vehicle dwelling friendliness?
That's a D. Safe parking lots do exist, which saves it from an F, but the complex permit laws and aggressive towing practices actively displace thousands of people who use vehicles as their very last resort.
Outreach and social services. A C-. We see amazing pockets of excellence, marred by systemic instability, horrific bureaucratic displacement, and even outright scams.
And finally, pathways to permanent housing.
An F. A less than 2% success rate in major areas points to a systemic stuckness that turns temporary relief into a prominent waiting room.
When we calculate all of those grades, factoring in the systemic barriers and the heavy criminalization of survival, the final perfectly homeless state score for California is a 42 out of 100.
You know, when you look at that 42, it raises a profound question about the American dream itself. What's doubly unsettling here is that the personal vehicle, which has long been the ultimate symbol of American mobility, freedom, and independence, becomes the exact opposite in this context.
Yeah.
In California, once you are forced to live in it, that same vehicle becomes an anchor. It becomes a magnet for compounding debt, impound fees, and total systemic immobility.
That's the perfectly homeless state score for California. But here's the bigger question. Would you survive homelessness in this state? But here's the bigger question. Let me know in the comments, and if there's a state you'd like to see next, tell me below. But here's the bigger question. This is a 50-state journey through how America actually treats people without housing. And every state tells a different story. But here's the bigger question. If you'd like to support the project, visit the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and pick up a PH hoodie. Every purchase helps fund future episodes and keeps these stories in front of the public. But here's the bigger question. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. But here's the bigger question. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. But here's the bigger question. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next state. This is a 50-state journey through how America actually treats people without housing, and every state tells a different story. If you'd like to support the project, visit the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and pick up a PH hoodie. Every purchase helps fund future episodes and keeps these stories in front of the public. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next state.